So with this, I would like to welcome all the participants in our panel and also our listeners or viewers to this webinar. The webinar is called Women in Politics, a Comparative Perspective of Sweden and Japan. And this webinar is a beginning of a larger project that we have, and which we call Women and Parliamentarism in Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, factors behind impediments to representative participation in the Northeast Asian democracies. And I'm very pleased to be able to introduce a very distinguished and experienced panel consisting of Ms. Boriana Åberg, a member of parliament for representing the moderate party in the Swedish parliament, and who is also the chair of the Sweden-Taiwan Parliamentary Friendship Association and vice chair of the Sweden-Japan Parliamentarian Friendship Association. We also have Professor Noriko Mizuta, or Mizuta Noriko, Chancellor and President at the International Institute for Media and Women's Studies in Tokyo. Dr. Mizuta holds a PhD in American Studies from Yale University, and her research areas include women's studies and comparative literature. We also have Professor Wachi Yasuko, or Dr. Yasuko Wachi, who's a board member and vice president of the International Institute for Media and Women's Studies in Tokyo. She also holds a PhD in anthropology from the University of California, San Diego. And then we have Ambassador Lena Sund, who is a Swedish diplomat who has also served in the UN. She has been ambassador to Angola, so a special envoy of Sweden to the Africa Great Lakes region and counselor for political affairs at the Swedish mission to the United Nations in New York, to mention a few posts. So I would like to welcome everybody. And we have 1 hour to discuss this very important issue, or these very important issues. And I would like to begin by asking Dr. Mizuta and Professor Wachi if you could just say a few words about your views on the main factors behind the relatively low participation of women in the Japanese parliament. We have, if we compare, for instance, the representation in Taiwan, I think the Taiwanese are doing much better. And South Korea is more or less on the same level as Japan, but I think even they are have a few more members of their assembly. But why do you think that this is the case? Because Japan is a very old democracy, and having an equal representation of men and women in our elected bodies is a very important piece of democracy. So with that, I'd just like to ask you to maybe say a few words, Dr. Mizuta.
Hello, my name is Noriko Mizuta. First of all, I'd like to thank Rush for organizing this project and then also this meeting. I am very much looking forward to hearing the panelists to talk about the Swedish cases and Swedish experiences in promoting women's participation in politics, which of course is rated #1 and the most wonderful situation in the world. I like in the beginning to say two things. One is that with the Afghanistan conditions, and then also this Ukraine conditions, I was really struck. And then I think it became very clear that still men and women are very much divided, that the men will fight and women will escape from the war with the children, and women and the children are victimized by the war. And this division and men's control over the war and then against the peace. It's all over the world. And I have a feeling that G7 and plus Japan included are so much used to the discourse of democracy, peace, and women's equality. And we have been talking among ourselves, and we, I think, realize that that is the most important issues. But I feel very powerless when I listen to the Prime Minister Kishida's talk about the war in Ukraine right now, that Japan wants to help, Japan wants to do something, Japan will be willing to support the victims of the war together with the European countries, I mean, Western countries. But Japan actually is not doing anything. And then I think the people in Japan, particularly in politics, do not realize that this really comes from the women's issues that is taking place in the world, and then see how women are victimized all over the world, except outside of ourselves. So I think by learning and thinking about Japan and then Swedish experiences, I would like to think how we could reach out to the women in the world so that they could be by themselves a power to fight for their equality and so forth. This is one thing that I really was thinking these days. The second point is that Japan has a wonderful constitution which really assures women's equality to men and in all other points in the world, in the society. And that was established in 1946. And this constitution is very much right now problematic issues that we would change the constitution or not, and so on and so forth. But what really strikes me very much is that in 1999, the equality of men and women, it says Danjo Kyodo Sangak Shakai, that men and women work together to Sangaku, equal participation in building the society. And it took such a long time. And also, it means that Japan needed that kind of law in order to promote women's equality and participation. And such a long time, since 1946 to 1999, that the government finally realized that they need a new law in order to do something to promote women's participation. And the question is, what's taking place during those post-war period? What was really happening in order to discourage women to be a part of the politics in Japan? And also, what are the factors which really let this condition continue for such a long time? And this is a question probably Dr. Valier just addressed to us, that we have to really face this situation, that not really many things happened during those 50 years. And still 20 years in 2021, I mean, 21st century, still things are very slowly going. And then probably improvement, of course, is there, but no radical or important, significant changes has taken place. And with the time limitations, I like to point to two things. One is that what happened really in 1960s, I think, is the key factors in thinking of women's this kind of discouragement and then not going into politics and taking the leadership in political issues and so forth. I think that one is that after the war, I think all the women are happy that the war was over. Unlike men, men had a very vacillating, I mean, very ambiguous feelings about the defeat, and also the former systems negated and the new democratic system was really imposed on us by unconditional surrender. And this has been the issue of the post-war discourse very much. But women had a sense of freedom only until 1960, I think. And then things has changed, and the patriarchal system and gender code, which was really created and then enforced through the patriarchal family system, was supposed to be a kind of destroyed by the defeat of the war and the new constitution. But very much starting from the late 1950s and 1960s, the nuclear family system was installed in order to contribute to the probably capitalistic development, the democratic capitalistic development, which brought Japan to a very quick economic recovery and also economic prosperity in 80s particularly. So women are forced to be in the home and a very domestic private sphere of the society in order to take care of the reproduction of life and the reproduction of labor power, that is to take care of the husband who work in the society in productive sector, production sector of the economy. And the women will take a very significant role in reproductive sector of the society. So kind of dependence of the women, and then the renewed, refabricated gender code, which was very much apparent in patriarchal family system, was again put in the development period of Japan. And that means Japanese, the recovery. And that means women have to be dependent upon someone for life. And what they are doing is a very important work, important thing to produce life, to take care of them, to nurture their development in life, and to take care of the husband who needs a recreation of the labor force. And so dependence became very much a part of women's both security and security in social positions, economic well-being, and also a kind of, the pride of themselves as women. And this was very difficult to change. Women, I think, lost somehow by the time of 1980s that their desire to be a leader or to take an initiative in changing the society as the Japan recovers its economic power and then become somehow affluent and then kind of social infrastructure was reconstructed by this economic power, that we are very happy to have very safe, hygienic, very clear, and then very culturally oriented society, and then women could have some part in art and then films and then so forth, although they are not creators or directors, but there are lots of places for women to work and to express themselves. And now I think it became very clear that the society will not probably continue to exist, I mean, Japanese society, because women now become, they didn't become independent, but they know that, first of all, they don't want to have children. And in 1970s, women insisted that women are different from men because we have a power to produce life. But now I think Asian women, particularly Japanese women and Korean women too, feel that they don't want to have children. So women's identity does not depend upon whether women have this birth power, bearing power or not. And secondly, women realize that I think during those 50, 70 years, I think women have lost their illusion about husband and also about nation itself, which is always metaphorized, I mean, by men and fatherhood and nation and the power and so forth are really connected as a sort of one value. So women became very much anarchistic in a sense that they don't believe in national power. And also the technology of birth has developed so radically that women do not need men in order to have children. And if they want to. So this kind of very drastic changes in order to keep the nation as a very healthy developing nation has now become at stake in Japan. So I think it is really the time for women to have a new consciousness about society and their participation, if they do have a belief in nation and what the democratic country can do. So I think this is really the time for Japanese women to learn more about experiences of European country, the developed countries, how they came to these situations, how they fought, or how they really, what did they do in order to have this consensus in the society that women are a very important partner in politics.
Yeah.
Thank you. I shouldn't talk
Thank you very
too
much. I think that's
I'm sorry.
fine. Very important issues. We will. I have some views on this. For instance, that a developed daycare system is very important, and so forth. There are many things that you can do on a very practical level. But let me ask Ms. Boriana Åberg, if with your experience of Japan and also Taiwan, and if you compare the situation for women in political life or in life in general, where do you see the differences, and where would you like to see some changes? Please go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you, Dr. Mizuta, for your speech, and especially for mention the Ukraine. 2 days ago, I participated in the extra session of Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe. This session was about exclusion of Russia as member of Council of Europe. And we created a women network from parliamentarians from all the nations except Russia in the Council of Europe. And our first meeting was about Ukraine. We start to discuss issues as how our country should take care of refugees, how we should provide food, medicine, and sanitary stuffs to people in Ukraine. And I reflect that we're as women parliamentarians, many of us members of committees on defense, committees on finance, committee on industry and trade in our national parliaments, we discussed women's issues or issues considered be women's responsibilities, instead of discuss how we should provide weapons to Ukraine. So still, despite our wider representation in political life, we still react as women, and we don't use our mandate as parliamentarians as men maybe do. I consider it being problems. For me, my knowledge about Japan is not. It's quite about Japanese political life is quite small. So for me, it's difficult to make comparisons. But I think many of issues mentioned by Dr. Mizuta, I completely agree with her. The most important thing to attract women to politics is to make them to be members of parties. And it's not very easy when women need to take 100% responsibility for their families, for childcare, and it's the biggest difference between Sweden and Japan. In Sweden, we have very well developed childcare and elderly care, so women can work with their careers 100%. And also, I don't know if it's the same in Japan as in Sweden. To attract women voters, a party needs to have a party list with a lot of women in it. It's a question of justice, of course, and all of the parties in Swedish parliament struggle to attract women voters. Some of our voters believe that only women can represent women's interests, and we have to respect that. But there is no doubt that an equal representation of women and men in the elected bodies increases the legitimacy of democratic institutions. I will stop here. I realize that I moved a little bit from the question. Sorry about that.
I think, thank you very much. I think we should probably have booked a 12-hour session. I think we can talk for some.
Sorry, I spoke too much.
No, that's fine. It's fine. But I will let Professor Wachi say a few words, and I believe that Professor Wachi also has some slides to show. So I will give the word to Dr. Wachi.
Thank you, Dash. Dr. Mizuta, thank you. I think she covered most of my first part of my presentation I prepared, so I will just jump into the core part. Since Dash asked us two questions, why the Japanese representation, the women representation is so low, and thank you, Peter, for showing the figure this. And you see the red line, which is the lowest is Japan, and the highest is Sweden. You can see very well. And then, but I would like to show the point to the graph's left side. It starts with 1970. Just remember. Remind you that the 1960 was the threshold in gender equality, and predicament of Japanese women's situation is very bad in 1960 on. So I think this figure illustrates that we have been steadily soaring toward the right side, from left to the right side. But if you see, if you expand, go back to the 1945 or 46, like Dr. Mitsuta said, we had this 1946 first general election for women. That was the 22nd one for men, because we didn't have suffrage, women's suffrage, until 1946. And at that time, the only 4 months preparation, women succeeded in getting 8.6% of the total parliamentary membership. You know, so it's, if 8.6 is like just below 2005 or something like that. But the most recent one we had was last year, October 2021. Women lawmakers, House of Representatives had only 8.9. So this 11.3 is quite a rosy number for us. And since Dash is a translator of Japanese feminist novel writers like Kirino Natsuo out, I still remember that you translated that into Swedish language. So I think I will recommend Boriana and Elena to read them, because it really, she really peels off the beauty veneer surface of Japanese society, socio-cultural beauty into the dark side. She probes into the dark side of Japanese society. And that really gave me the impression of making comparative thinking about the prostitution, how Sweden treated with this thing, this issue, or human trafficking issue. Well, I will remind you that Japan made prostitution illegal in 1951. Well, you can raise your eyebrows for that. Dr. Mista said it took so long. From 1945, Japan agreed with the UN Charter, and also 1946, Japan agreed with the International Labor Organization's equal remuneration for equal payment for equal work. And Japan agreed all this way back, 77 years back. And why did it take so long to make the law of gender equality in 1999? And the title of law, Dr. Mizuta really couldn't make it smooth, because it is translated in English, gender equality law, but in Japanese it's a men, women equally participate basic society law. and it doesn't mean anything if you hear it at first in Japanese. So when I heard at the 1999 ASEM as an observer sent by Dr. Mizuta to UN in New York, I jumped up from my seat when the Japanese government translated this 男女共同参画社会基本法 into gender equality law. I really said, wow, we made it. But no, as I can ask Peter to show the picture of the Japanese government Bureau of Gender Equality. This is a picture of, because in 2014, Japan made the Gender Equality Bureau to make to recruit 100 men to make a declaration of, to make effort to make women shine. These are the men. So this was 2014 or 16. Okay, next picture is the current one. I just this is this year's bureau's picture. So all the men who want to make women shine is putting up their motto or goals or pledges to make. And then at the bottom you see 4 women and 1 man without any pledges. Those are I think the government staff. But these other men are shining with their, happy, smiling face, that they are happy to empower women by their pledge, So these 2 pictures show I think if you want to visit the government gender equality site, you would expect to see some spirited women leader like Dr. Mizuta there, or state minister for gender equality. Right now, I think Noda-san is the very rare woman who's there. But others like Kato-san and all the other state ministers were men, and who thought that making women empowered is recruiting these business rich people to pledge that how they can make women shine. But I would like to see because giving a hint from Rash's translation of Kiru no Natsuo of Out, I think it showed a really dark side of Japan, and it's a prostitution, and the feminist activists in Sweden made it in 1999 the act for against violence against women act, and within 10 years they made 50% reduction of prostitution, because the difference between Japan and Sweden is Japanese law making prostitution illegal, but criminalizing the sellers. But the Swedish or Nordic approach is criminalizing purchasers. That made a real difference. In 10 years, it reduced half. And then Norway followed 10 years after that, Sweden, the same thing. And then Norway and Iceland next year. And then in 2016, I think the United States in New York City and San Francisco followed a similar way, criminalizing the purchasers. But now, I thank Boriana mentioning about helping Ukrainians. They are now immigrating out of Ukraine. If they are welcomed in good hands, they are okay. But we hear that some of the women and children of all ages are in the hands of traffickers, human traffickers. And it's in a really critical stage. And I think I ran out of time now, but I would like to say that Japan has a long pledged commitment for gender equality, and then adhering to the Human Rights Declaration and then the International Labour Organization equal remuneration. But the reality is here. Men would like to, in a very goodwill sense. They would like to help women to shine. But the reality is that Dr. Mr. said that at the Ukrainian issue, we feel very powerless. And I feel hope when I heard from Boriana that Boriana is making a women's network among the parliamentary women and across border. And I hope that she can connect the Taiwanese and also Korean parliamentary women and the Japanese parliamentary women into this network. And I would like to thank you for your efforts. And thank you, Peter, for helping me with the pictures. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are beginning to be short of time, but I would like to ask Ambassador Lena Sund to comment on what you have heard so far, if there's anything special, or if you have any views on the situation, if you compare Sweden and Japan, for instance. But it's up to you how to address the issues.
Thank you very much. Well, over the years, I have worked a lot on the issue of gender equality, but in the context more of in countries like Africa or in the UN, etc. And there is one thing that I think is quite important to underline, and that is that Sweden was, so to say, not born with its now situation of fairly good equality between men and women. It happens very often that we can't compare because you are so different, but that is not true. The difference is, I think, more one of time, but not one of really essence in a way. And I will try to be brief, but I have looked at some of the questions that Peter sent to us before. And there it says that, is the cultural factor for real or just a convenient way to promote non-action? And then also there is another saying that, is equality in politics something that could be considered part of Swedish culture? And that's what I'm saying. No, it was not part of Swedish culture earlier on. But of course, now I think it is. But there is, if you look historically, and interestingly enough, I think that if listening to Professor Misuta, it's interesting to see how Sweden and Japan, how developments were so different after the Second World War, while in a certain way, the economic development had similarities. I think for Sweden, we had a long-term study about Swedish economics in the late 60s, early 70s, which came to the conclusion that Sweden did not have enough labor force. So there were two ways to remedy this. One was, of course, importing labor or immigration. Another one was to encourage women to join the labor force. And it wasn't in a way either or, but having this as a realization, I think was a very, very good basic for the government and parliament being actually interested and seeing the benefits and the necessities of encouraging women, and encouraging in a way that the policy of the government or had to adapt. Childcare, you could easily have, or you could have actually 6-day work, 6-hour work day, etc., etc. We changed our tax system so that it would also encourage. And I think that has been very, very helpful for Sweden. And of course, in a certain way, looking at what the situation is in many countries right now, it's also maybe a luxury, because the lack of labor is rather sort of the unemployment, which I think in many countries is a glaring situation. But I think that in those days, when in the 50s, there was exactly the same situation in Sweden as I believe in Japan. The Swedish women were home taking care of the family. The men were working outside. So then when society realized that we need women to work also outside of the homes, that's when we sort of started to take off. And if I look at equality in politics, this was even later. I do remember, I think it was in the 90s, when we for the first time had a government which proudly announced, where the prime minister proudly announced that now there were the same number of men as women in the government. And he also made a point saying that there was no problem selecting the women. The problem was the men. Of course, he was joking there, but he made a point in any way that these women were not there as tokens. They were there because of competence. So then can Japan sort of benefit from our experiences?
Yes.
I think we can, but you know, I also have learned over the years that what one can do is one can pick things up, but of course everything has to be adapted, and the work has to be done by those who are the nationals. But I think still that dialogue and so on can probably also benefit. I limit myself to this. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Can I say
I
something?
wonder if you have, yes, Dr. Mizuta, you would like to say something? Yes.
Thank you very much. It encourages me very much that European nations, especially Sweden, was not born, with that gender equality, but women and the politics got together to promote it and to change the society, which I think is very applicable to Japan. I think what we need is that. But I like to mention two things. One is that women do not have success stories. Women do not have a figure, the models that women get involved in politics and then had made a good, success and then examples. And we need it very much. And also, Japan is composed of very strongly by the private sectors of economies and then social affairs, and government does not have a very strong power in making policies, although it is their job to make policies. So in the past 70 years, the very few laws are made in order to improve women's situations, so that the private companies kept the different retirement age, different wage systems, and even the absurd laws that women have to retire when they got married or when they had children or when they became 25 years old, like in the case of Japan Airlines, it's gone. But so the government doesn't kind of use their power in order to make policies and interfere in private sectors. And then that, of course, is an escape. So we need some success examples that we have to fight for the causes and get the good result. And that's one thing. And also, as I mentioned, women have lost, I think, trust and the interest in politics very much. And we believe in equality, and then just like Western countries, because we had anyhow spent with under this constitutions. But we are also very much discouraged. For example, we need labor power. We want to promote foreign people to come and study in Japan or to work in our labor, areas, but we get very much discouraged by, say, the immigration phenomena that is taking place in Europe. For example, if there are too many refugees and too many the foreign workers, then that would stimulate the right-wing people, and we'll have lots of problems in politics. So at this time, we know that women has to work because we have labor shortage, and we have to say import, human power from foreign countries, but the policies really right now do not encourage us to do so. And so we are encouraged and also discouraged by what is taking place, what has taken place in case of this immigrant refugees that created certain conflicts in Western countries and particularly EU countries. So I think women has to be again encouraged, and also we know the necessity, but we need some kind of system changes and the policy, government involvement in this issue. So I think to send representatives to the government is so important, I think, right now in Japan.
Very important view. Ambassador Sund mentioned the tax system, and I think this is very important that
Right.
in Sweden, each and every individual is taxed on his or her conditions, and it's not so that as it was before, that the family was taxed as one unit. But I think in Japan, it's still the family that is taxed,
Yes,
basically.
that's right. Yeah.
I think this is perhaps one very easy thing to change.
Yes,
But
we want
please.
want to change, but I think the not the democratic parties, but parties such as Riken Minshito. Watson will help me in English translation.
Constitution
is powerless.
Democratic Party.
Yeah, Democratic Party. Okay. So even the issues of women keeping their own surname, the Democratic Party made a very important policies at the elections, but that really made the party lose the votes, because Japanese people thought more kind of the national, what do you call it, the policies against China, with China, and then this the military powers rising around Japan is more important. So the politics, I think, is very much at the issue that we need to change the party, what you call it, distributions, that so much Democratic LDP has some kind of majority. And then, as Yasuko pointed out, we have a very few ministers, but the minister have a very limited power in making policies. It's a prime minister who makes the policies, and the party is completely kind of occupied by men. So we have to really change this to start with, really, and make the policies to the important policies really that could impart the power to change the situations. So
I think perhaps Ms. Boriana Oberg, you have some comments on that.
Yes, I think it's very important that women are economically independent, and also that about taxation, which you mentioned, it's quite easy to be changed in the legislation. I also want to highlight the question which Professor Wachi mentioned when speaking about this club of men, which with the purpose to make women shine. If they want to make women shine, they need firstly to give them resources, to give them possibility to have their own organization, which means give them money. The state should provide money to the party's women's organization, money just for this purpose, which need to be accountably, you know, that no one can steal this money or use them for something else, for men's clubs and such things. Also to give them time. If you need to be engaged in the politics, you need your own time, not to run between the store and to take all the responsibility for the domestic issues and childcare and everything. And also we need to motivate women, both in Japan and of course, even in Sweden, that they should know how important it is to be involved in the politics, and also to empower them, because women, both in Japan and even in Sweden, tend to underestimate their qualities. But women have a very high level of education in both countries, and we are perfectly capable to compete with men on their own playfields. Ambassador Vario mentioned Taiwan. In Taiwan, they have legislative gender quotas, and it's maybe explanation behind the better representation of women in their different political bodies. I'm not a fan of gender quotas, but I think in Japan and your political environment, maybe it should be a good idea.
Very, very, I think it's very critical. Time and money, Oriana, thank you. The time study reveals that women work longer time, but the income is about 1/10 of what men for the same time of work, because there's a tax system that if a wife earns more than 1,330,000 yen, and then the husband will be taxed a lot. So the housewives, they do not stay home. They work, but they work at a very low wage, and it's a very bad cycle. And I think Dash's translation of Kirino Natsuo's novel really shows, women work very bad working conditions, like working at midnight after putting children go to bed, and then they go out to work until like 3 o'clock in the morning, and then come back and then prepare breakfast for the husband to go to work. And all this, the time and the money is the critical things and the tax system in Japan is really an impediment of women to become economically independent. And yeah, okay, thank you.
I know we're getting towards the end of the webinar, and I know that Ambassador Sund is soon have to leave, but could you perhaps say something about the situation in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs? I know myself that when I began as a Swedish diplomat, there were very few women ambassadors, and now the situation has improved. What are the factors behind that relative success, do you think?
Well, I think one necessity for being able to change was the fact that more women started to become recruited to the foreign ministry, because once you have basically 50-50 on the diplomatic side, there is no reason really why you shouldn't have the same as ambassador. But it took some time. And I do remember when I myself was appointed as ambassador the first time, which was in 1995. We were 5 women who became ambassadors in those years, or on that occasion. And then there were relatively few. And the comments from male colleagues was actually that, well, now I have no chance because I have the wrong sex. But of course, there was still a vast majority of male ambassadors. So we've had the same struggle. We had the same struggle when it was the same issue when ministry decided that there'd be a middle level training, which then there were rumors saying that if you hadn't gone through the middle level training, you could not become ambassador and so on. Initially, there were very few women there. So it's, and just to tell to our Japanese friends, really, it's, as I said before, in essence, we have gone through the same kind of struggle, but we are, we started earlier. And now I'm sorry I have to leave, but thank you very much. I very much appreciated listening to all of you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Dana.
So I wonder if Dr. Mizuta and Dr. Wachi and Ms. Obari, if you have any final comments, maybe 1 minute each. If I start with Dr. Mizuta. I'm sorry for the time limit. It's also getting late in Japan.
Right. Take the Japanese structure of Japanese society, that the government, although its duty is to make policies to improve the societies, but still, I think they do not consider it is important to have policies and then put the budget on women's issues, and then for the equality, gender equalities, compared to, say, national issues, other issues. So we tried to approach through so-called essential workers like nurses and also the caretakers for aged people. Those welfare questions are very important nationally, and those areas are taken up by women. So, and also cultural structure, tradition of families, privately taking care of elderly people and then handicapped people and so forth, allowed to have this low-wage essential workers to continue to exist. And also the foreign laborers who are brought into Japan will take that positions. But that is a very important issue that Japan now realizes, that the government realizes. And then some changes are coming in. So I think appearing, and then the wage has been raised only a little bit, but for those essential workers, and then women will get the benefit because most of the workers are women. But I think that what is really a problem is Japanese women do not know how to fight, or they gave up the ideas of really making a social protest. And as I said, they are happy by being kawaii culture and then enjoy whatever the freedom they are given to express themselves. they don't demonstrate as women's power. They don't fight. They don't try to make the issue out of very important things like violence against women, and then the laws too. Even the Supreme Court made terrible decisions about those things. So kind of we have to fight, as the ambassador told us, patiently and takes time and persistently. That's one thing. But also we have to have a pressure on the government to do something. And that becomes, the two kind of important things get together. And then we have to really have a network, international network, to encourage Japanese women too, I think.
Thank you. And perhaps this is the beginning of one network that we can.
Yes, that's really wonderful.
And Boriana, do you have any final comment?
Yes, I'd like to stress the importance of role models, even international ones. I'm a representative for opposition, but I'm very happy that Sweden now has a female prime minister. It's very important for every
very nice.
young girl that she can see that, look, I can be prime minister too. It's important, and also I'd like to stress the importance of attitudes in the society to women in politics. Women are exactly as capable, even more capable than men, and they should be encouraged to enter the politics. And also in the questions we received from Peter, it was a question about informal women's associations and networks. It's also very important. So I will be happy to share my very limited knowledge about politics and with Japanese colleagues. In Council of Europe, Japan has status as observer, and every time there are only men who attend the meetings, maybe it's time for the parliament in Japan to send some ladies, and we will be happy to include them in our informal network of ladies in the parliament. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Wachi, do you have any final comment?
Yeah, I have one thing that Dr. Mizuta said, that the power of art and culture. I would like to, I mentioned Kirino Natsuo, the feminist writers, that also her work has been made into films. And the work of arts and films and music really would motivate people to think about the realities. And the money thing is one very big impediment for women to go into election, because in Japan, it is election is very costly. That's why recent arrest of 35 people for bribery. And then, but then before this this coming election, the current government decided to give 5,000 yen per household for just the same day when the candidates went onto the streets for making the election speeches. It was on March 15th. They made this, well, we'll give out 5,000 yen. This money and the election connection should be really separated. Then the women are not intimidated from getting into politics, because it's very costly.
With that, I think, unfortunately, we have to end this webinar, but I'm very happy that you have shared with us your opinions, and I'm sure that we all feel that we will continue and have more webinars, and that this is the starting point of a process that we at the ISDP would like to at least.
Now I'm full of questions now.
Yes. So I'm sure that we will have more to say in coming webinars and meetings, but I would like to thank you so much for participating. It's been very
Thank you.
great that
Thank
you shared
you,
your time with us.
Thank you, Boriana. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you for participating.
Thank you, Dr.
We'll see you
Mizuta.
soon again, and
Okay.
soon it's night in Japan, so I hope you have a good night's sleep.
Yes. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good
Thank
night.
you very much and good night.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.